Ladies and gentlemen, our next panel on stage will be transitioning innovations from lab to market. Please welcome to the stage panelists Steve Mollenkopf, France Cordova, and Steve Schwarzman, along with moderator Yael Taku.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here today. I'm Yael Taku. I'm a senior partner with McKinsey & Company, where I work with companies to harness innovation and technology for growth. I'm very excited to be here today to talk about the journey from lab to market. And I have an extraordinary panel here to help me with that. Collectively, they wear multiple hats, from private firm, investor, academia, government. Before I introduce them, I want to start with some observable facts, 3 of them, that collectively may be telling us a story. So first, simple fact, R&D spending is going up globally across public and private sectors. Second, this increased R&D is increasingly concentrated in the hands of fewer and fewer global firms. So our research shows that the top 10% of global firms have nearly doubled their R&D and intangible investment spend over the past 20 years. And this leads me to my third point, which is that while the economic profit to those firms has increased, that is almost entirely driven by the increase of scale and capital that they've put in, not due to the returns to that invested capital. The returns themselves have been stagnant or even declining. So taken together, this suggests a more challenging environment for innovation, one that may not simply be solved by spending more, and certainly gets more complicated when we widen the aperture beyond private sector to include other actors here. So what do we do to unlock more potential? After all, we're sitting at the age of great discovery, lots to get done, lots to solve: AI, advanced genomics, my kids' favorite plea to me, virtual reality, for Fortnite on the mobile phone. And Steve, if you could just get on that, I'd appreciate it. Lots to do. So where do we look to unlock? Do we look to the lab, right? Problems are harder to solve, breakthroughs tougher to find. Innovation just requires more resources than ever before. Do we look to the market? Is it a market issue? You know, with increased competition, once products hit the market, economic benefits are competed away faster than ever before. So if you are a smaller firm and you're making a relatively risky bet, and the reward is not commensurate to that risk, you're going to, over time, pull back. Or do we look to that journey between lab and market, that treacherous journey from discovery to deployment, where products go to die before they see the light of day? It's been called the Valley of Death. I could not have picked a less motivational phrase if I tried. Is that valley itself getting steeper? Is it getting more fraught? Does it represent one of the biggest unlocks if we could just ease the path to commercialization? So with me today are 3 panelists. I could not have picked a better panel to help us with these questions. Steve Mollenkopf, the CEO of Qualcomm, who for over 3 decades has been setting the pace of innovation in the wireless industry. And the race for 5G is fast and furious. But Qualcomm just this past week announced that they are powering the first 5G handset to be deployed commercially, a great and timely reminder of their continued leadership in lab to market. France Cordova, the director of the National Science Foundation, which is tasked with keeping the United States on the leading edge of discovery in foundational science and engineering, from astronomy to zoology and all the letters in between. She's an astrophysicist. She is the former president of Purdue University and the former chief scientist to NASA. Last but not least, Steve Schwarzman, the CEO, chairman, co-founder of Blackstone, a leading global asset management firm. He's also a very active philanthropist. So among many of his gifts, the one I'm going to highlight here because of its relevance to us today is a recent $350 million gift to MIT towards a $1 billion new university named the MIT Stephen A. Schwarzman College of Computing, which among other things aims to cultivate AI scholarship in the sciences and interestingly in the humanities as well. So we'll look to Steve for his insights as an investor, but also for his views on the role of the university in the innovation ecosystem. So welcome. France, I'd love to start with you and just explore this balance between research and commercialization. The NSF funds a tremendous amount of basic research in this country, but you are not by any means in your lab silo. In fact, under your leadership, this administration's leadership, you're increasingly vocal about the importance of taking research and working with researchers to translate to products and services. You have a lot of programs to do so. Can you talk about whether the US has struck the right balance between investing in basic research on one hand and deployment and market application on the other?
Both are just so important, investing in the basic research and then investing in its translation or movement onto application and to development. And whether we've struck the right balance or not, I'm not sure. I think it's very important that agencies like the National Science Foundation are investing in long-term basic research. And in addition, we're also funding new approaches to innovation to try to do the translation, as you said, from discovery to deployment, or I call it discovery to delivery to the American people. So we, from our, more than 30 years ago, we started funding the Small Business Innovation Research Program, the SBIR program, and that was the first, and now every federal agency funds that. It's just been an extremely successful program and funded lots of the industries that are with us today. And from there, we've constantly built on infusing the basic research that we fund into new programs and new kinds of approaches. So the most recent approach that we have to taking discovery to delivery is called the Innovation Core, or I-Core. And this has been so successful in just a few years' time. 9 federal agencies have joined the program and have their own I-Core programs now. And one state, the state of Ohio, and a country, the country of Ireland. But this is a program that touches young people in the university and at the graduate level, and increasingly at undergraduate level. There are nodes all over the country. And it really teaches them how to become entrepreneurs and how to take the discoveries that they are involved with, or perhaps somebody else on their team is involved with, and learn what kind of market potential it has. And they have a lot of education and mentorship also with it. And it's turned out to be an extremely fast way to take discovery to innovation. I think in just 6 years' time, it's produced more than 500 startup companies. And also, it's not just about the startups, it's about the people who didn't waste their time because they realized when they did the market research on their invention that it wasn't going to go anyplace, so they better turn to something else. So we look at the whole spectrum from the long-term investment in the basic research, but also focused on what can be short-term deliverables and how to achieve innovative new ways of actually making that translation happen much faster.
And France, as I understand it, you gave Steve his first paycheck,
yes.
so to speak. So in other words, one of the NSF's first programs, right, was to fund NSF, and this is a little bit of what happens when you grow up. So it's a terrific poster child, right?
1985, Qualcomm was in our first round of SBIR funded programs, and you did good.
Wow.
Happy graduation.
That was a little bit before my time, but
yes,
I'm very thankful that it happened.
So let me take you back there, actually, not all the way back there, but in the days of CDMA, you know, Qualcomm set the standards, and it's easy to lead in a market where you set the standards. In 4G and 5G world, Qualcomm's not in a position to do that, and yet you're still often first to market. How do you do it?
Well, I think one of the things to remember, and it sort of goes along with your opening comments, the complexity of the problems are larger. That's one of the reasons why the R&D is larger, if you look at just raw dollars. The small complexity problems largely are not, they're done. So now what we're trying to deal with these huge issues. I mean, in the early days, for example, of Qualcomm, It was, how do we get people to communicate with each other? Then that was really the 3G. How do we do it efficiently? And we of course did that. Then the question was, how do we put a connected computer in your pocket? There was a lot of technology in addition to just the connectivity that had to happen to make the computer small enough to get it in your pocket. Now the problems are, how do you connect everything in the world securely? And then what are the industries that have to be created? So the scale has grown dramatically. Now what's happened, in answer to your question, is that the number of companies, though, that are working in individual areas are now smaller. So for example, in our industry, we actually view, today, we probably carry more water in the standards bodies than we did back in the 3G days because there were fewer companies doing it, and the R&D intensity is higher. So you'll see it's actually more concentrated. So the stakes of getting it wrong, of course, hopefully the rewards of getting it right are higher. But largely what you're seeing is it's a more concentrated R&D world. And so therefore, you actually have as much influence as you've always had. The inventions are still as easy to get commercialized. The difficulty is, how do you scale it? And how do you scale it into industries that are not designed to take the technology? And that's really the challenge of 5G, which I'm sure we'll spend some time talking about.
Yeah, yeah. Steve, I want to take this into the investors' world. So what are the markers you look for when you're investing in a new innovation? And how do you get the confidence in a company's ability both to birth it, but to also deliver it to the market?
Well, we do innovation ourselves, so we make that decision as to what do we want to do. In our case, because we're a financial company, it's mostly in software. Yeah. And what problems do we want to tackle? What do we think the payback is? It always costs more, takes longer. It's a lot like, renovating your house. And what we've learned that a terrific model for that type of investing is to bring it pretty far along to where it's basically working, and then go to customers, people who compete with us in this case, and sell them an interest in it, helps them become a large customer, but we basically turn it into a company. And then as we expand it, what would have been just an expense for us to develop something becomes a profit center. And that model we've done sort of repeatedly.
You've done okay.
And it's pretty neat. We get the best technology in our industry. We use it for a while, then we, in effect, sort of sell it to other people, and then we together usually sell it out to some other firm, and everybody's a winner. So that kind of model is good. On the other hand, we have, somewhere at any point in time, companies that we own with about $125 billion of revenue, 500,000 people, and so technology is a big part of our life. But unlike Steve, for the most part, technology can do you a lot of damage because you're going along normally and all of a sudden something pops out of the birthday cake, really upsets either your business model or puts a hole in a piece of it. And so what we've learned is we have to be alert to everything that's going on. And if you're not, you could be doing something you think is perfectly reasonable and find out that you've just dug yourself into a deep hole. So in answer to the question, on a limited basis, what we have to do is when something comes out, we have to see how good is it sustainable? Are the people good enough? Do they have enough capital so the thing's going to be around? And in some cases we adopt it, in some cases we let it go by and see what happens.
And what kind of leash do you give your companies on innovation? I mean, we hear a lot about companies saying, look, there's just undue pressure because of capital markets and, and pressure for earnings. And, some markets, some companies seem to get a longer leash, take some of the tech companies, and others that are more R&D intensive may not have that luxury. How do you talk to your companies, and what's your philosophy on that?
I know I must seem very old-fashioned on this stuff, but if you have something you think's a terrific opportunity, you should just pursue it. And if it's not, don't. And pursue it as long as you have to, as long as you have a giant-sized market and you think you have something special. Because when you win in that game, you really win big.
Steve, can you take that medicine? So if you see something special, just do it?
Yeah, we
You're
have
a
the same-
public company.
Actually, it's very similar. If you look at when we've gotten the best returns or created the most value, it's when we've done something that didn't exist before,
Right.
where the risk is, did I get it in the wrong year versus this is going to create a lot of value for somebody. And that's why you tend to see, for us, for example, we're always focused on what is the next big generational change in wireless, because we bet on the technology change, we don't bet on the particular market structure, for example. And you know, we've been fortunate enough to have enough of those around in the areas that we have expertise to pursue them. But absolutely, if you're investing into a market that doesn't exist, and again, it's a giant market, you just pursue it with a lot of aggression.
You don't have that short-termism, that pressure. You somehow manage through that.
You do, but really, I think successful organizations are driven by the opportunity as opposed to what happens if we get this wrong. It's sort of the stress of this could be big and we don't want to miss it is really the part that makes people excited.
And I would argue that the reason why you have those opportunities to look at and decide is because we invest in very smart people and take risks on their ideas.
Yeah.
And I mean, look at 3D additive, 3D printing additive manufacturing. NSF funded the very first grant on that.
Yep.
When everybody just said this is crazy stuff, and it started out as mathematical modeling and then putting the layers on and everything, and then it's grown into its various forms and developed into small companies and then larger companies and all. And the same thing with search engines. I mean, we were funding search engine development before Google was a household name. But so I think this really ties the work that we all do together very nicely, that in order to be able to review these ideas, and as Steve was saying over here, really click on them, really invest in them, you have to be able to generate those ideas in the first place. And that really devolves to the people that have these ideas and recognizing that this may be high risk, but it may also be high reward.
So friends,
I'm sorry, can I just add, I think also one of the things not to be lost is sometimes the ideas don't win, but the people that you create are tremendously valuable. So for example, there were things that NSF did and DARPA did that created core competency in teams that we were able to hire, and then 10 years later, you need that technology to drive 5G. For example, there was a lot of antenna work that was done that we would not have commercially viable millimeter wave products in a year from now unless that work was done. 20 years ago, we created that expertise in universities as a result of funding, and we're basing huge amounts of economic value in the company or the country based off of that. So don't forget about the people that are created as well.
So go with that for a sec. So if we flash forward, in 20 years, who's going to be sitting in Steve's chair? Who's the next Qualcomm that you're funding today? Ideas super upstream that are going to turn to a successful company like Qualcomm.
You want to know their names right now?
Yeah, I'm going to write them down.
We're constantly expanding the universe of the people that we fund. Interestingly, I think the most important thing is that we reach out to everyone. And that's, I think, a real difference today, that we had enough great ideas coming out of the universities and the people that went to them and the people with the faculty in decades ago, that we could just fund them. And now we realize that we've left a great amount of talent behind, and we're devising new ways to kind of capture that talent within our own country. So we have programs like the Includes program that NSF has, and I was able to announce at the White House 2 days ago that 5 other federal agencies have joined that program to broaden participation in STEM, to capture the women and underrepresented minorities and folks from lower socioeconomic levels that have not been able to be a part of STEM and have not been able to be creators and inventors and the company heads that you're talking about for the future, but to reach out and embrace them through a lot of different programs. And it's turning out to be a very successful model. And just like SBIR was, and then the I-Corps program, was emulated by many other agencies, so is our inclusion program. And I think that that's really relevant to what we're talking about, is to raising the next Steve and Steve.
The next Steve and Steve. So I want to turn to the dark topic of the Valley of Death. Can you, France, comment on how that valley has shifted, has evolved? What do you see as the big pitfalls in terms of the collaboration, for example, across the various actors that you guys all represent? What goes wrong?
Well, I hear so many people saying that they wish that we wouldn't talk about the Valley of Death. They wish it would just close their eyes and it would go away. But it is a very real thing. And I think, if anything, we just know more about it, and we know it's not the same valley for every different type of occupation and different types of companies. They all have their own particular valleys with its own characteristics. But it is very real that you get to a certain point with your pilot programs and your pilot hardware and all, and then you need to have increased capital investment in it. And I think nowadays what's different is that people recognize that so clearly that it's like a bridge is starting to form across that valley, and people are trying new approaches, coming at it from the industry side and coming at it from the government side. So we have more programs that where we fund we fund industry people to come into the university and work with them, and vice versa. We fund programs that are partnerships for innovation. We fund centers that bring industries and universities together to do research collaborations. We fund programs like the I-Corps program that I mentioned, SBIR, and so on, a whole lot of programs that are on the upstream side. And gradually, as those create more startups, they're getting more opportunities to be exposed to investors. Like, and that's what's nice about the I-Corps program. It's really looks a lot like the Y Combinator program that we're familiar with. And so investors are realizing that that's where they can come and perhaps, help some over that valley of death.
Yeah.
Recently, I was at UT Austin to give a talk on a new kind of program we have called Convergence Accelerators, which is a program to accelerate research on the future of work and on harnessing the data revolution by bringing together groups of faculty and student investigators from all over the country to work in very focused tracks on a very rapid time scale to bring discovery to delivery. And I was treated to a visit with one of our engineering research centers there, which does work on microelectronics for energy usage. And they insist that they have found a way to cross the Valley of Death through scaling and making their little devices, just making thousands, millions of them, so that that's how they envision crossing this Valley of Death. So I think that we're putting a lot more energy coming at it from both sides of the valley, creating a lot more programs, and I'm very optimistic that we are making gains. But
yeah, optimism?
Well, it sounded mixed optimism, and I'm in an industry where things move very quickly. I mean, you may have noticed the stock market's been doing it this week. We have things that we do, both technologically and otherwise, where we see a market, we want to get to it very quickly. These are more, fundamental research can take many, many years for innovation and commercialization. We try and take much shorter time frames. And so, our innovations have a valley of death to the extent that the opportunity moves away. And it doesn't matter what you're doing. If the opportunity is there, it's pretty easy to design things that work relatively quickly. And so you just have to have the discipline. And so they're in a different business where, this could be a 10-year run. And that's hard to finance.
It's hard to finance.
But in a funny way, that's why SoftBank ended up with their Vision Fund, and it's also why it got to be close to $100 billion. It's like an out-of-body experience in terms of its scale. Why? Masa just came up with the idea of becoming the capital market for technology. So if the IPO market is sticky, or out of favor, he's just become the market. It's actually sort of brilliant. Forget how it ends up working out or what price you pay for an individual thing. He has replaced the market. And the private market has fed him, even though it's quite lumpy, with 2 sovereign funds, has fed him the money to be the market. So if anybody's got a problem and he thinks it's good, he can just go in, take the next bite, the bite after, and all of this is sort of based around an Amazon model where that company was run for, 15, 20 years without a profit. I don't know from companies without a profit. And it was accepted. And the stock market financed it. One of my friends at Morgan Stanley kept giving him these monster amounts of money. And I kept saying, there's no profit. Well, how can you do this? Well, everybody bought it, and now they're the monster of the midway, right? So that model of I don't have to have a profit can be financed now. In the old days, that didn't work too well. And then you have these giant follow-on funds like Vision Fund, and that helps get you through, some people through, this valley of death.
Yeah. And what's your valley of death experience? I mean, you pivoted away from, we were just talking backstage, from CDMA to GSM when it was necessary. And that pivot is really hard to do. I mean, you had to swap out your portfolio and shift the cool cats working on the fun stuff to the stuff that wasn't fun to do. What's your experience with the Valley? And by the way, are we optimistic? Are you optimistic?
Well, so we probably have the less of the classic, issue. We've probably grown ourselves out of it. But the difficulty has been, one, where do you go next? And what has enough size and what is consistent with what you're good at doing? And for us, we had a couple of times in the history of the company where the big issue was, okay, we need to go into another geography or another ecosystem that we're not in. What do we have to learn in order to go do it? In the case of the GSM WCDMA ecosystem about 2 decades ago, we had to do that. We had to do it again in LTE. We're doing it now in 5G, primarily in the channel space, meaning the technology we know how to do. Yeah. But the question is, how do you scale it so that an industrial company can take it? How do you take it? How do you make it so that a company that's trying to figure out how to do cellular doesn't need to know anything about cellular, but they know that they need to get their things connected to the internet? And that's less of a technical problem and more of a how do I scale something? How do I create an ecosystem that extends? And that tends to be what dominates, our, I would say, scaling of technology now versus anything else.
Yeah. I want to touch on for a second the academia role, and I'm going to tell you guys something backstage. Remember, France is a former president of Purdue, and she was saying, "Hey, Steve, you are a university president's dream. Thank you very much for your generous gift and how phenomenal what you're doing." Can you just tell us what inspires you to do that and what you're trying to get done?
Yeah, I'm not a technologist. I'm just sort of a generally educated social science person, and I live in the real world, and I see what's going on. I'm on the board of a graduate school in China called the Tsinghua School of Economic and Management, and on that board we have a number of really remarkable people from the tech world. We have Jack Ma from Alibaba, and Robin Li from Baidu, and Pony Ma from Tencent, and Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook, and Tim Cook from Apple. So, at least at the last meeting, we had 5 of the 10 biggest market cap companies in the world on this little board. And, I was on a bus ride with Jack 3 years ago, and he started talking about AI. I never heard of AI. and what was going to happen in the future and what the risks were, for people, the ethical issues, and sort of where he came out, and he started telling me where all the other companies and major players came out. So I thought this was really fascinating, and I happen to know a lot of those people. So I would talk to them, and everybody had strong views, different views on the, sort of AI for good or AI for maybe not so good for somebody. But they all had a unified view that this is a completely transformational technology. And if you put quantum, I don't know whether it's on top of it or alongside it or with it, that you have an application that is the killer app for not just my generation, which will disappear at some time, but this is like it for the future. And I started looking at that, and then by accident, because I have this program called Schwarzman Scholars, like the Rhodes Scholars, but we take kids to Tsinghua, I ended up meeting all these university presidents, one of which was Raphael Rafe at MIT, and we started talking, and we became friendly, and I said, U.S. seems to me, based on all my trips to China, I go there a lot, U.S. is really falling behind on a relative basis from wherever they were 5 years ago. And money is pouring in. And I started meeting heads of some other countries, and whether they're Canada or France, everybody thinks they're doing something. And I sort of looked at this and said, whatever lead we think we have, we're going to start having it being eaten into. And so I was talking to Raphael about it, and he had some ideas and what to do, and I didn't think they were that compelling, so we went back to the Skunk Works, and he came out and he said, what do you think if I doubled my faculty in artificial intelligence and quantum? And we connected it with all the other parts of the university, so we'd be the only AI-enabled university. And I said, that sounds pretty neat to me. That sounds good.
You're in. I'm in.
I said, so then, you'd be in a really advantageous position. He said, well, that isn't the point. I said, so what's the point? Commercially, you just want to own it and keep it. He said, no, in the knowledge production business, what you want is to spread it around. You want to produce more knowledge. And I said, so you're talking about an arms race with the other universities, because if you double, I'll spare you the names of the head-to-head competitors. They're double, and then knowledge will start doubling. And that'll happen in the developed world for sure, US principally, but other places. He said, yeah, that's what'll happen. So I said, well, so the missing piece then is US government piece. And US government's doing fine, but compared to some other governments, absolute dollars are, wherever we are being eaten into, we need like a major, sort of Sputnik response, a moonshot. And I said, we should do that. So I looked at this as not just a charitable gift to just one institution. I looked at this as something that can create, real change in the United States, a very big, ambitious thing. And, you asked me backstage, I guess you did, like, why did you do this? And what did you think? That's what my wife said. What are you doing? And because I'm not a technologist, and I didn't go to MIT. So
let me ask you, because you teed up this question of both intended and unintended consequences, and I've flipped to the audience questions, and literally the first three are basically about this. Let me ask this question. At what point in the innovation cycle do we think about the unintended consequences? So do we wait to questions of applications and commercial uses, and they'll leave the lab for unfettered innovation? Or do we need to bring those considerations into the lab itself?
I'd like to answer that first, and then you have some smart people do it.
Okay.
I think the things that can go wrong with this technology, if you will, for the average person are potentially very big. And you can't let this genie just get out of the, the magic lamp. And I think you have to innovate back pretty far and educate people who are doing this kind of work to be thinking about things. And I think you need standards so that things just don't, once it's out, things are really tough to control.
Yeah.
So that's sort of my view on this.
Yeah, yeah. France?
Yeah, no, I agree that you have to start early, and universities are, by the way, just great investment, Steve, just absolutely super. And it is a long-term investment. So, I know you just said you were used to short-term investments and getting return, but
I think there's a whole pipeline right here, the investment all the way to
this is going to really last.
We do long-term ones too.
Yeah. So, having students from the get-go be understanding the consequences of the technologies that they're interested in and having a dialogue around that is something that is really good. And a lot of universities actually have infrastructure ways of doing that. They incorporate classes, curriculum into their technology centers. I visited one at Arizona State University, a biodesign center, where they actually require every student that is in the design center to take a course that's related to the social and ethical implications of this. And we at NSF believe so strongly in this. Just last week, we put out a request for proposals that is a combination between our computer and information science and engineering directorate and our social and behavioral Economic Sciences Directorate, asking for proposals that look at the ethical considerations around artificial intelligence specifically. So we fund it, we think about it, universities are training students in it. It's just very important, but the technology is not going to stop. As long as there's the potential to create it, somebody's going to do it, and we need to be there, but having that ethical framework around it is essential.
Steve, I would love for you to address this question in particular, which I like. China has decided what specific technologies they are investing in over the next 10 years. Should the US be doing the same?
They should, but we obviously have a different approach to prioritizing. I think it's a little bit of a mistake to think that people look at these grand plans and that's how they do their investments. The marketplace really does drive everywhere. I mean, we spend a lot of time, in fact, the two of us spend a lot of time in China, and it's very market driven. People are working on the same technologies, and I'll be honest, the same thing that works in the United States works in China, which is you have to have innovation and things that people need in an area that's a problem that people need to solve. And kind of people know what those things are. The approach of, okay, here's a list of things and we need to go do it, tends not to be useful, I think, in terms of organizing the front end of the investment cycle. What is useful is when there are industries that will develop, but only develop if you have a partnership with government. That's when it's important to have those plans. So, for example, in your previous question, there are certain problems that people don't try to solve because they know if I'm going to go into the healthcare industry, I got to be a big company, I need to deal with liability, and I need to deal with the government in order to get them. But there's huge opportunity there. Now, there are more and more of those opportunities coming because the technology and your life and the infrastructure of your life and the infrastructure of business are colliding. And so you need to actually have a combination of, I think, almost no direction at the beginning, but there are certain problems where you have to have a partnership between companies and government to make the market even develop.
Actually, it's a great note to end our discussion on, this partnership, and frankly, so well represented by each of you. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you.